Dr. Laura Bennett stared at her computer screen in the quiet hours of the lunar morning. The numbers didn't make sense. She had run the quantum entanglement experiment 15 times, and each time, the results broke the known laws of physics. Her small office in the Lunar Research Station felt even more cramped than usual as she tried to understand what she was seeing. "This can't be right," she whispered to herself, running her fingers through her short brown hair. The coffee cup beside her had gone cold hours ago, forgotten in her excitement over the strange readings. The experiment was supposed to be simple: create a pair of entangled particles and measure how they behaved when separated. But something odd happened each time she ran the test. The particles didn't just maintain their quantum connection. They seemed to bend the space between them. A soft knock on her door made her jump. Dr. Peter Martinez, her research partner, stood in the doorway with 2 fresh cups of coffee. His tired smile suggested he had been up all night too. "Still working on those weird readings?" he asked, placing 1 cup on her desk. The steam rose in the low lunar gravity, creating tiny swirls in the air. Laura nodded, pointing to her screen. "Look at this, Peter. When we separate the particles, they're not just staying connected. They're actually pulling space itself into a new shape. It's like they're making a shortcut through reality." Peter leaned closer, his eyes widening as he looked at the data. "That's impossible. The energy requirements alone would be—" "I know," Laura cut in, "but look at the power readings. We're using less energy than it takes to run the coffee maker. Something about how we're doing this is different from every other attempt in history." Outside her window, Earth hung in the black sky, a blue and white reminder of home. The view usually calmed her, but today it only added to her sense that everything she knew about physics was about to change. A message popped up on her screen. "Priority communication. Earth Defense Force." Laura's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't told anyone about her findings yet, except Peter. How did they know? The message opened automatically, revealing the stern face of Admiral Christopher Douglas. His silver hair and sharp blue eyes commanded attention even through the screen. Behind him, Laura could see the busy Earth Defense Force headquarters, where officers rushed back and forth with urgent purpose. "Dr. Bennett, Dr. Martinez," the Admiral said, his voice grave. "Our quantum monitoring systems detected unusual activity from your lab about 6 hours ago. I need you both to explain exactly what you've discovered." Laura and Peter shared a worried look. The Earth Defense Force monitoring their work wasn't unusual. They funded most of the research on Luna Station. But direct communication from an admiral was unprecedented. "Sir," Laura began, trying to keep her voice steady, "we were running standard quantum entanglement experiments. But we found something unexpected. The particles aren't just maintaining quantum connection. They're actually bending space-time itself. And they're doing it with almost no energy input." The Admiral's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. "Dr. Bennett, are you aware that we're currently at war?" Of course she knew. Everyone knew about the war with the Exerxian Empire. The aggressive alien species had been pushing into human space for months, their technology far superior to humanity's in almost every way. The only reason Earth hadn't fallen yet was the protection of their allies in the Unified Species Alliance. "Yes, sir," she replied. "Then you understand why I'm about to tell you that your research has just become the highest priority project in human space. We're sending Dr. Susan Wright, our lead xenotechnology specialist, to your lab. She'll arrive in 6 hours. Until then, continue your experiments but do not share your findings with anyone." Douglas out. The screen went dark, leaving Laura and Peter in stunned silence. Through the window, Earth continued its slow spin, unaware that in a small lunar lab, humanity had just stumbled onto something that might change the course of the war. "We should run it again," Peter said finally, breaking the silence. "We need to be absolutely certain about these results before Dr. Wright arrives." Laura nodded, already setting up the next test. As she worked, her mind raced with possibilities. If they could bend space with so little energy, what else might they be able to do? Could they create weapons that ignored the normal laws of physics? Shields that bent attacks away through higher dimensions? The next 6 hours passed in a blur of experiments and data analysis. Each test confirmed their initial findings. Somehow, their human-designed quantum system was doing something that should have been impossible. It wasn't just bending space. It was doing it efficiently, elegantly, as if the universe had been waiting for someone to try it this way. When Dr. Susan Wright arrived, she didn't waste time with introductions. The tall xenotechnology specialist walked straight to Laura's computer, her dark eyes scanning the data with intense focus. After several minutes, she spoke without looking up. Have you considered why this is working for us when every other species has failed? Laura blinked in surprise. Other species have tried this. Dr. Wright nodded, finally turning to face them. The Exergians have the most advanced quantum technology in known space. They've spent centuries trying to achieve what you've done here by accident. The Unified Species Alliance has tried too. None of them could make it work with less than stellar levels of power input. But why? Peter asked, voicing the question in Laura's mind. Because, Dr. Wright said, a slight smile forming on her face. They don't think like humans. Their minds don't work the same way. Every species in the galaxy approaches quantum mechanics from a mathematical, logical perspective. But humans, she paused, tapping the screen displaying Laura's results. Humans have always had a unique way of perceiving reality. We see patterns others miss. We make intuitive leaps that other species consider impossible. Laura's mind raced with the implications. Are you saying we succeeded because we're human? Because we think differently? Exactly, Dr. Wright replied. Your experiment worked because you designed it with human intuition. You didn't try to force the universe to bend. You asked it nicely, in a way that made sense to a human mind. And apparently, the universe liked that approach better than brute force. Through the window, Earth's dark side was coming into view, city lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Somewhere up there, the Exergian fleet waited, their superior technology held at bay only by the combined forces of humanity and their allies. But now, in this small lunar lab, 3 humans stood looking at data that might change everything. We need to weaponize this, Dr. Wright said quietly. The Exergians are planning something big. Our intelligence suggests they're preparing for a major offensive, and our conventional defenses won't be enough to stop them. Laura wanted to protest. She was a scientist, not a weapons designer. But as she looked at Earth hanging in the black sky, she thought about all the people down there who needed protection. If her discovery could help save them. All right, she said firmly. Where do we start? Dr. Wright's smile widened. We start by calling this what it is, Project Reality Anchor. Because that's what you've discovered, Dr. Bennett. A way to anchor reality itself to human will. And if we can develop this fast enough, we might just save humanity from what's coming. As if to emphasize her words, a distant flash lit up the lunar sky. A battle in high orbit, too far away to hear, but close enough to remind them all of what was at stake. Laura turned back to her computer, her tired mind already racing with new ideas. They had work to do, and somewhere out in space, a clock was ticking down to humanity's next test of survival. Admiral Christopher Douglas stood at the window of his office in Earth Defense Force headquarters, watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean. 3 weeks had passed since Dr. Bennett's discovery, and things were moving faster than anyone had expected. On his desk, reports piled up about the latest tests of what they now called the Reality Anchor technology. A soft chime announced the arrival of his expected visitors. He turned to face them as the door slid open, revealing Dr. Laura Bennett, Dr. Peter Martinez, and Dr. Susan Wright. They looked tired but excited. A good sign. Show me, he said simply. Dr. Bennett stepped forward and placed a small device on his desk. It looked surprisingly ordinary, just a gray metal cube about the size of a coffee mug. A soft blue light pulsed gently along its edges. This is our first working prototype, she explained, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "We call it the mini-anchor. Watch this." She pressed a button on top of the cube. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then Admiral Douglas noticed something odd about the air above the device. It looked wrong, like someone had taken a piece of reality and gently twisted it. "What am I looking at?" he asked, leaning closer. Dr. Martinez stepped forward. "That distortion is actually a small bubble where we're bending the laws of physics. Right now, inside that space, gravity is running sideways instead of down." To demonstrate, Dr. Bennett took a pen from the Admiral's desk and tossed it through the distorted area. The pen curved in an impossible way, as if caught in an invisible river, before falling normally on the other side. Admiral Douglas let out a low whistle. "And this is just the beginning." "Yes, sir," Dr. Wright answered. "We're already working on larger versions. The energy efficiency is beyond anything we thought possible. Something about human brain patterns seems to make these devices work better when we're controlling them." The Admiral nodded slowly. He'd seen the classified reports from their alien allies. The Unified Species Alliance had tried for centuries to develop something like this, but their attempts always failed or required massive amounts of power. Somehow, human scientists had cracked the code in just 3 weeks. "Tell me about the weapons applications," he said, getting straight to the point. Dr. Bennett looked uncomfortable, but Dr. Wright stepped in smoothly. "We've developed 3 main prototypes. The first is a defensive shield that bends incoming fire into another dimension. The second is what we call a reality mine. It creates a bubble of altered space that can trap enemy ships. The third," she paused, glancing at her colleagues, "the third is something entirely new. We call it the probability lance." She pulled up a holographic display showing test footage. A small drone fired the weapon at a target. Instead of a normal energy beam, it fired what looked like a twist in space itself. When it hit the target, the metal seemed to forget how to be metal. It came apart like sand in a breeze. "The lance doesn't just attack matter," Dr. Martinez explained. "It changes the probability of matter staying together. We can tune it to affect different types of materials. It's like we're telling the universe to reconsider its decisions." Admiral Douglas sat down heavily in his chair. "And the Exurgents won't be able to copy this technology." "No, sir," Dr. Wright said firmly. "We've confirmed that their brains work fundamentally differently from ours. They're completely logical, mathematical. They can't make the intuitive leaps needed to control these devices efficiently. It's like trying to understand poetry by analyzing grammar. You missed the meaning entirely." A deep rumble shook the building slightly. Everyone turned to look out the window. High above, they could see the flash of weapons fire. Another skirmish with Exurgent scouts testing Earth's defenses. "How long until we can deploy these weapons?" the Admiral asked. "The shields can be ready in 2 weeks," Dr. Bennett answered. "The mines need another month of testing. The probability lance, that's trickier. We need to make sure we can control it properly. Right now, it's a bit like trying to write with your opposite hand. We know what we want to do, but the control isn't quite there." Admiral Douglas stood up and walked to a large map display on his wall. It showed the current position of Earth's forces and their allies, facing off against the growing Exurgent fleet. Intelligence suggested they were gathering for a major assault, but no one knew exactly when it would come. "You have 1 week," he said finally. "Get me those shields ready, and at least 1 working prototype of each weapon. I'm assigning you a full military support team and moving your lab to a secure facility in Colorado. The Exurgents are planning something big, and we need to be ready." The scientists exchanged glances. A week wasn't much time, but they all understood the stakes. Dr. Bennett picked up the mini-anchor from the Admiral's desk, its blue light still pulsing steadily. "One more thing," she said hesitantly. "We've noticed something strange during our tests. The devices, they seem to work better when we're under pressure. It's like they respond to human emotion, human need. We think that in a real combat situation, they might be capable of things we haven't even seen in the lab." The Admiral raised an eyebrow. Are you saying these weapons are partially powered by human feelings? Not exactly, Dr. Martinez cut in. It's more like they're extensions of human will. The more focused and determined the operator is, the more effectively they can bend reality. It's why other species can't use them properly. They don't have that same connection between emotion and action. Another explosion lit up the sky outside. Closer this time. The defense systems would handle it, but everyone in the room knew these probing attacks were just the beginning. Get to work, Admiral Douglas ordered. I'll have transport ready in an hour to take you to the new facility. Whatever you need, equipment, personnel, resources, you'll have it. Just get me those weapons. As the scientists left his office, Admiral Douglas turned back to the window. The sun had set completely now, leaving only the stars and the occasional flash of weapons fire. Somewhere up there, the Exercians were preparing for what they thought would be their final victory over Earth. They didn't know that in a small lab in Colorado, humans were about to change the rules of the game. The Admiral smiled slightly. The Exercians had always looked down on humans as an emotional, illogical species. Now those very traits might be their undoing. In the corridor outside, Dr. Bennett and her team were already discussing modifications to their designs. They had 1 week to turn their prototypes into working weapons, and they couldn't afford to fail. The future of humanity might depend on their ability to harness this strange new technology, this human way of bending reality itself. As they walked, the mini anchor in Dr. Bennett's hand pulsed with a slightly brighter blue light, as if responding to their determination. In 1 week, they would find out if humanity's unique perspective on reality would be enough to turn the tide of war. The countdown had begun. Lieutenant Amy Porter's hands were steady on the controls of her ship, but her heart was racing. The Exercian fleet had appeared out of nowhere, dropping out of faster-than-light travel right on top of the mining colony on Eurova. Her small defensive fleet was the only thing standing between the aliens and 3,000 civilian workers. Status report, she called out to her bridge crew. The reality anchor device hummed softly behind her, its blue light casting strange shadows across the command deck of the EDF Starcolor. 5 Exercian destroyers and 1 mothership, Mom, her sensor officer reported. They're launching fighters. Our shield grid is at maximum power. Amy watched as the enemy ships spread out in a familiar attack pattern. The reality anchor technology had only been deployed to the fleet 2 days ago. They'd barely had time to train with it. Now they were about to find out if it really worked in combat. All ships, defensive formation, she ordered. Remember your training. Let the anchors guide your actions. Don't overthink it. The 6 human ships moved into position, their new reality-bending shields creating slight distortions in space around them. The Exercian fighters were approaching fast, sleek silver craft that looked more like arrows than ships. The first volley of enemy fire streaked across space. Amy held her breath, watching as the energy beams approached her fleet. This was the moment of truth. The shields worked better than anyone had expected. As the Exercian weapons fire reached the reality-bent space around the human ships, it simply curved away, as if the universe itself had decided the attacks shouldn't connect. Amy could feel the reality anchor responding to her relief, its hum changing slightly. Return fire, she ordered. Reality mines, pattern delta. Her ships launched their new weapons, small devices that created bubbles of twisted space. The Exercian fighters were too fast to dodge them. 3 of them flew into the distorted areas and simply vanished, trapped in pockets where space folded back on itself. But the Exercians adapted quickly. Their remaining fighters split into smaller groups, probing for weaknesses. The mothership moved forward, its massive main gun charging with an ominous green glow. They're targeting the colony, her tactical officer shouted. That weapon will punch right through the ice sheet. Everyone down there will die. Amy felt something change inside her as she looked at the readout showing the colony. Thousands of human lives, men, women, and children who had built their homes under Europa's ice. The reality anchor's hum grew louder, resonating with her determination to protect them. Without fully understanding what she was doing, Amy reached out and touched the anchor's control panel. In that moment, she wasn't thinking about the physics or the training or the proper procedures. She was thinking about the people she needed to save. The device responded in a way no one had predicted. The space between her ship and the colony shifted. It was as if reality itself had hiccuped. The massive energy beam from the exertion mothership fired, but when it reached the distorted area, it didn't just curve away. It turned completely around, arcing back toward the ship that fired it. The exertion mothership's shields absorbed most of the reflected blast, but the aliens were clearly shocked. Their attack formation broke apart as they tried to understand what had just happened. "How did you do that?" Dr. Bennett's voice crackled over the comm. She was watching the battle from the Europa Command Center. The anchor shouldn't be able to redirect energy like that. "I don't know," Amy replied, still focused on maintaining the distortion. "I just needed it to protect the colony." And it did. The Kirchen ships were regrouping, but Amy could see they were uncertain now. Their usual tactical precision was gone, replaced by cautious movements. They had never seen their own weapons turned against them like this. "All ships," Amy called out, a new idea forming in her mind. "Stop trying to use the anchors exactly as we were trained. Trust your instincts. Feel what needs to be done, and let the technology follow." Her crews understood. One by one, the reality anchors across the fleet began creating effects that should have been impossible. Space twisted and folded in new ways. Some ships seemed to be in two places at once. Others created cascading waves of distorted reality that scattered the exertion fighters like leaves in a storm. A young ensign on one of the smaller ships discovered he could create a tunnel through space that let their weapons fire bypass enemy shields completely. Another crew found they could temporarily speed up time inside their engine core, giving them impossible bursts of acceleration. The exertions didn't retreat immediately. They were too disciplined for that. But as they watched their careful battle plans fall apart against weapons that seemed to ignore the laws of physics themselves, their attacks became increasingly desperate. The mothership tried one final assault, launching all its remaining fighters in a suicide run at the colony. Amy felt the reality anchor pulse in time with her heartbeat as she reached out again, this time with a simple thought. No. Space itself seemed to agree with her. The fighters simply stopped, frozen in a bubble where time had ceased to flow. They hung there like insects in amber, trapped between moments. "Impossible," she heard Dr. Bennett whisper over the comm. "The power readings we're getting. This shouldn't be possible. You're reshaping reality with less energy than it takes to run the ship's coffee maker." The exertion mothership finally gave the retreat order. Their remaining ships turned and fled, jumping to faster-than-light speed as soon as they cleared Europa's gravity well. They left behind their trapped fighters, still frozen in Amy's time bubble. As the adrenaline faded, Amy felt exhausted but triumphant. She looked at the reality anchor, its blue light now pulsing in perfect sync with her breathing. "Send a message to command," she told her communications officer. Tell them we know how to use the anchors properly now. It's not about controlling them. It's about working with them." In the Europa Command Center, Dr. Bennett was already frantically recording everything she had observed. The battle had proven something she had suspected but couldn't prove in the lab. The reality anchor technology wasn't just a tool. It was more like a partnership between human intuition and the fabric of space-time itself. The implications were staggering. If every human ship could do what Amy's fleet had just done, if every crew could learn to work with the anchors instinctively rather than technically, the entire war might change overnight. Admiral Douglas received the battle report an hour later. He read it 3 times, paying special attention to the power readings from the reality anchors. The exertions had always believed that bending reality required enormous amounts of energy. They had built their entire civilization around that assumption. But they had never considered that reality itself might be willing to bend if you just asked it the right way. And somehow, humans had figured out how to ask. The Admiral looked out his window at the stars, wondering what the Xerxes were thinking now. They had just discovered that everything they thought they knew about physics, about the impossible, about the limits of technology, might be wrong. And somewhere in deep space, a Xerxian commander was preparing to report a disturbing truth to his superiors. The humans weren't just fighting back anymore. They were changing the rules of reality itself. The war would never be the same. Commander John Hayes stood in front of the massive holographic display in Earth's Strategic Command Center. The room was packed with military officers and scientists, all gathered to discuss what they now called the Europa revelation. On the main screen, video footage showed Lieutenant Porter's fleet bending reality in ways that should have been impossible. "Play it again," he said, focusing on the moment when the Xerxian energy beam turned back on itself. "Dr. Wells, what do you make of this?" Dr. Margaret Wells, their youngest quantum mechanics expert, stepped forward. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she pointed to the energy readings. "It's beautiful, really. Lieutenant Porter didn't just reflect the beam. She convinced space itself that the beam should go the other way. The energy cost was almost zero." Major Richard Clark, their veteran space tactician, shook his head in amazement. "I've been fighting Xerxians for 5 years. I've never seen them retreat like that. They looked scared." "They should be," Dr. Wells replied. "Everything they know about physics says this is impossible. Imagine if someone broke into your house by walking through walls. That's how they feel right now." Commander Hayes turned to face the room. The people gathered here represented humanity's best minds in both military strategy and scientific understanding. They had one job now: figure out how to use this new advantage before the Xerxians recovered from their shock. "Dr. Bennett's team has confirmed what happened at Europa wasn't a fluke," he announced. "The reality anchors respond to human intuition and emotion. The stronger the need, the more impossible the effect. We need to rebuild our entire battle doctrine around this fact." He touched a control, and the display changed to show the current positions of Earth's forces. Blue dots represented human ships, green showed their alien allies, and red marked the Xerxian fleet positions. "The Xerxians are regrouping here." He pointed to a cluster of red dots. "Intelligence suggests they're trying to understand what happened at Europa. They've pulled back their forward units and increased their shield strength. They're scared, but that makes them dangerous." Dr. Wells raised her hand. "We need to train our crews differently. Stop teaching them to use the anchors like machines. Teach them to use them like musical instruments. Feel the rhythm of space and work with it." Major Clark nodded slowly. "I've been talking to Porter's crew. They say using the anchors feels like learning to walk. At first, you think about every step. Then suddenly, you're running and jumping without thinking at all." The door opened, and Admiral Douglas walked in. Everyone stood a little straighter. He carried a data pad with new intelligence reports. "At ease," he said. "We just received word from our allies in the Unified Species Alliance. They'd been studying the Europa battle footage. There," he paused, looking for the right word, "disturbed." "Disturbed, sir?" Commander Hayes asked. "They've never seen anything like this. Their scientists say we're doing things with reality that should take the energy of a small sun. When we showed them the power readings from Porter's fleet, they refused to believe them at first." Dr. Wells stepped up to the holographic display. "May I, sir?" When the Admiral nodded, she pulled up her latest research data. "Look at these brain scans," she said, pointing to colored images of human minds using the reality anchors. "When we work with these devices, we're not forcing reality to change. We're suggesting changes. And reality listens. No other species can do this. They try to bend space like breaking a door down. We knock and wait for it to open." The room was quiet as everyone considered this. On the main screen, the battle footage played again silently. They watched as human ships danced through impossible spaces, their reality anchors turning the laws of physics into gentle suggestions rather than iron rules. Commander Hayes turned to Major Clark. How do we turn this into a working battle strategy? We can't just tell our crews to feel their way through combat. Actually, Major Clark said, that's exactly what we should do. Look at Porter's fleet. Once they stopped following the technical manual and started trusting their instincts, they became unstoppable. We need to train our people to think less and feel more. The Exercians won't understand that at all, Dr. Wells added with a small smile. Their whole society is built on pure logic. The idea of emotions making technology work better, it goes against everything they believe. Admiral Douglas walked to the center of the room. We need new training programs, new battle formations, new everything. The old rules don't apply anymore. Commander Hayes, I want you to work with Dr. Wells and Major Clark. Build me a doctrine that treats these reality anchors as extensions of human will, not just fancy technology. The holographic display shifted to show the solar system. Somewhere out there, the Exercians were planning their response. They wouldn't stay scared forever. When they came back, they would come with everything they had. One more thing, the Admiral said. Our alien allies are sending observers. They want to understand how we're doing this. Let them watch, but remember, we barely understand it ourselves. This is human intuition at work. We can't explain it any more than we can explain why music makes us feel emotions. Commander Hayes looked around the room. Scientists who had spent their lives studying the laws of physics were now learning that those laws had loopholes, if you asked nicely. Military officers trained in conventional tactics were realizing that their best weapon might be their own humanity. Sir, he said to the Admiral, what if we're thinking about this all wrong? What if the reality anchors aren't weapons at all? What if they're just translators, turning human thoughts and feelings into changes in reality? Dr. Wells' eyes widened. That makes sense. It's why they work better under stress. Strong emotions, clear needs, they come through stronger in the translation. Major Clark was already working at a console, drawing up new training scenarios. So we teach our crews to think of them that way. Not as weapons to control, but as partners to work with. Like dancers moving together. The Admiral smiled slightly. The Exercians are in for a surprise. They think they're fighting a technology. They're really fighting the human spirit itself. And that's something they've never understood. As the meeting continued, new ideas flew back and forth. Traditional military doctrine mixed with pure scientific theory and human intuition. They were writing a new chapter in the history of warfare, one where the strength of human emotions could literally bend the universe. Outside the Strategic Command Center, the sun was setting over the Pacific. High above, Earth's defense fleet orbited, their reality anchors pulsing with soft blue light. Each one was ready to translate human will into impossible actions, to turn determination into distorted space, to make courage into a force that could reshape reality itself. The war was about to change. Not because humanity had built better weapons, but because they had finally found a way to make the universe listen to their hearts as well as their minds. The Exercians were about to learn that sometimes the most powerful force in existence wasn't logical at all. It was purely, uniquely human. Captain Lisa Rodriguez watched as the massive Exercian fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Her sensors counted over 300 ships, the largest attack force ever sent against Earth. The enemy vessels filled the space between Mars and Earth like angry metal stars. They really brought everything this time, her first officer said quietly. Lisa nodded, her hand resting on the reality anchor control panel. The device hummed softly, its blue light steady and strong. After 2 months of training in the new reality-bending techniques, her crew moved in perfect harmony with their ship's strange technology. All ships, report in, she called over the fleet communication channel. One by one, the 50 human vessels acknowledge. Each one carried multiple reality anchors now, their crews trained to use them as naturally as breathing. The Exertion fleet moved forward in perfect formation. Their ships looked different, heavily armored, with reinforced shields glowing visibly around them. They had clearly spent the last 2 months preparing for this battle. "They think they've figured us out," Lisa said to her bridge crew. "They think bigger shields and stronger armor will protect them from what we can do." She smiled slightly. "They still don't understand." The first Exertion message came through. "Human fleet, surrender now. You cannot stand against our numbers. Your reality-bending tricks will not save you today." Lisa didn't bother responding. Instead, she opened a channel to her own fleet. "Remember your training," she said calmly. "Don't think about the physics. Don't worry about the numbers. Feel what needs to happen and let the anchors help you make it real." The Exertion fleet launched their first attack wave. Thousands of fighter craft poured out of the larger ships, while energy weapons charged on the capital ships. They had planned this assault carefully, expecting the humans to try the same tricks they had used at Europa. But humanity had learned new tricks. "Now," Lisa ordered, "Pattern Dreamweaver." 50 reality anchors activated at once, their operators working in perfect sync. Space itself seemed to shiver. The Exertion fleet suddenly found itself fighting in a reality that didn't play by normal rules anymore. Some ships discovered they were now flying backwards no matter which way their engines fired. Others found themselves in spaces where straight lines curved back on themselves. Weapons fire passed through strange zones where time ran at different speeds, emerging either too fast to track or slow enough to dodge easily. "Second phase," Lisa commanded. "Everyone pick your partners and dance." Her crews knew what she meant. In the 2 months since Europa, they had learned to work with the reality anchors in ways that felt more like art than science. Each ship began its own reality-bending performance, creating effects that flowed together like movements in a symphony. Lieutenant Porter's ship made space forget how to conduct energy, turning the Exertion's weapons into harmless light shows. Another human vessel convinced a patch of vacuum that it should act like water, drowning several enemy ships in waves of impossible liquid space. The Exertions fought back with everything they had. Their superior numbers should have made the battle one-sided, but they were fighting with logic and physics, while humanity had learned to fight with imagination and will. Lisa's own ship created a cascade of spatial folds, turning the space around her vessel into a maze of twisted dimensions. Enemy ships that tried to target her found themselves shooting at reflections, while their sensors reported her being in dozens of places at once. "They're trying to adapt," her sensor officer reported. "The Exertion flagship is scanning our reality distortions, attempting to predict patterns." "They still think this is about patterns," Lisa said, shaking her head. "Show them why they're wrong. All ships, free form, let your hearts lead." The battle transformed into something that defied traditional military analysis. Human ships moved through space like dancers, each creating their own impossible effects that somehow worked together perfectly. Some crews made their ships phase between moments of time. Others convinced reality that their vessels were both solid and ethereal at the same time. The Exertion fleet's perfect formation began to break apart. Their logical, calculated attacks couldn't cope with a battlefield where reality itself changed from moment to moment. Ships that tried to retreat found themselves moving forward instead. Carefully planned tactics fell apart when the space they were fighting in refused to maintain consistent properties. "Ma'am," her communications officer called out, "we're getting surrenders. Dozens of them. The Exertion crews. They're panicking." Lisa understood why. Everything that Exertions believed about the universe was being proven wrong. They were watching human ships ignore the laws of physics with casual ease, while their own superior technology struggled to function in spaces where reality had become fluid and responsive to emotion. The Exertion flagship made one final attempt to turn the tide. It fired its main weapon, a planet-killer beam that could crack worlds. The energy burst was powerful enough to break through any known defense. But Lisa's crew didn't try to defend against it. Instead, they reached out through their reality anchors with a simple, shared feeling. This attack should not happen. The beam fired, traveled about halfway to its target, and simply decided not to exist anymore. That was the breaking point. The Exertion fleet's formation collapsed completely. Ships began surrendering or retreating in chaos. Their carefully planned grand offensive had turned into a rout, defeated not by superior firepower, but by humanity's ability to make reality itself a willing ally. All ships, hold position, Lisa ordered. Let them retreat if they want to. They've learned what they needed to learn today. As the Exertion fleet scattered, Lisa received a transmission from Earth Command. Admiral Douglas appeared on her screen, looking both amazed and proud. "Outstanding work, Captain," he said. "Our alien allies are, well, they're having trouble believing what their sensors are telling them. How are your crews holding up?" Lisa looked around her bridge. Her people were tired but happy. Using the reality anchors took emotional energy more than physical strength. "We're good, sir." The anchors worked perfectly. It felt natural. Natural, the Admiral repeated. "That's what scares the Exertions most, I think. Not that we can bend reality, but that it feels natural to us. That we can do it while barely thinking about it." The battle zone was clearing now. Where there had been chaos, space was settling back into its normal behavior. Reality was returning to its usual rules, like ripples fading from a disturbed pond. "What happens now?" Lisa asked. "Now," the Admiral smiled. "Now we show the galaxy that humanity isn't just another spacefaring species. We're something they've never seen before, a race that can reshape reality itself through sheer force of will and emotion." As if to emphasize his words, Lisa's reality anchor pulsed with a bright, harmonious blue light. The device seemed almost happy, like it was pleased to have helped prove what humanity could do. The war wasn't over, but everyone knew it had changed forever. The Exertions would return eventually, but not as invaders. They would come seeking to understand how humans did what they did. They would learn that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe wasn't logical or mathematical at all. It was the simple, unique human ability to look at reality and say, "I wish things were different," and have reality answer, "Yes, let's try it your way." Lisa looked out at the stars, shining steady and bright now that space had returned to normal. She wondered what other impossibilities humanity would make possible, now that they had learned to ask the universe nicely instead of trying to force it to obey. The message was clear. In a galaxy full of species that tried to conquer reality through technology and logic, humanity had found a different path. They had learned to treat reality itself as a partner in creation, guided by emotion and intuition as much as science. And reality, it seemed, preferred their way of doing things.